July 1st, 2019. It's a momentous day for the people of Hong Kong as they marked the 22nd anniversary of the former British colony's return to China. But the Establishment Day, as they call it, which was held in honor of the handover, was marred by clashes between the police and anti-government protesters who stormed into and ransacked the city's legislative council.
I was shocked and grieved beyond words. It was simply unbelievable.
At the heart of the crisis is the government's attempt to introduce the highly contentious extradition bill. If passed in Parliament, it would allow criminal suspects to be extradited to other countries, including mainland China, to stand trial.
香港就要搜集證據去告個被告，但係內地就唔係嘅。
But what really lies at the core of the widespread opposition against the proposed bill? Why has it created so much anger and animosity among large segments of the Hong Kong society? And is this anger justified? Hong Kong, one of Asia's top financial centers, has been a city on edge for the past weeks. Unhappiness has been brewing since March 2019, when the chief executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, proposed to amend an extradition bill. It gained momentum following the gruesome murder of a pregnant girl by her boyfriend during a trip in Taiwan last year. The suspect, a Hong Kong resident, admitted to the crime after returning home. He, however, could not be extradited to the island to face trial because of the absence of a formal extradition agreement between Hong Kong and Taiwan. Currently, Hong Kong has extradition treaties with 20 countries. The amendment, if passed, will expand the arrangement to include extradition of suspected criminals to Taiwan and China. The move has triggered widespread protests in Hong Kong, prompted by concerns that it would expose residents in the city to China's legal system, which they believe is deeply flawed.
We want electoral reform.
The original purpose of the bill is to address an alleged murder suspect, a Hong Konger that commit a crime in Taiwan. And the intention of the bill is to address that, because we currently, Hong Kong, have only signed a permanent extradition arrangement with 20 countries. Singapore, US, UK are included, but Taiwan is not. So the original purpose was to have this a case-by-case, one-off extradition arrangement with the rest of the world that not included already in that 20 countries. But as it turns out, much of the attention has been focused on China alone. But the bill itself is not for China. It's meant to be for the rest of the world. When the bill was first announced and introduced back in late February, for the first 1 or 2 months, it gone very quiet. I mean, yes, there's some concern, but nothing to this level of widespread today.
Indeed, the opposition to the extradition bill has galvanized much of Hong Kong, something that has caught the government, headed by Chief Executive Carrie Lam, by surprise. It was the most unified protest march in the city in more than a decade. Some 2 million protesters took to the streets on June 16, calling on Mrs. Carrie Lam to withdraw the bill. This protest was on the back of an earlier protest on June 9th, when an unprecedented 1 million people marched on to put pressure on the government to comply with their demand. Violent clashes between the police and anti-government protesters eventually broke out. The police responded by firing tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowd. At least 80 people were hurt.
I saw the anger of the young people. And this is absolutely unprecedented. So no one can say it is just another protest. We have protests almost every other day, but these things like what happened, simply unknown to Hong Kong before.
I've never seen so many people in my life. The turnout was beyond everyone's imagination. But also, Hong Kong people has never been as united, as determined to stop this bill from going ahead.
Demonstrations are not unusual in Hong Kong. In fact, Hong Kongers tell me the right to protest is a cherished way of life. Since the 1997 handover, there have been at least 5 big ones, but the reason for all of them is largely the same: the perceived erosion of Hong Kong's core values, including the rule of law and the freedom of expression. These protests, possibly the largest since the handover, are Hong Kongers' way of pushing back against Beijing's rising influence. Hong Kong was promised a high degree of autonomy under the Basic Law, which came into effect following the territory's return to China from Britain in July 1997. The law guarantees Hong Kong's capitalist, legal and legislative systems for 50 years under the principle of one country, two systems. But over the years, there have been growing concerns over attempts by China to interfere in Hong Kong's affairs and tighten its control over the city. From the 2012 plan to introduce national education that extols the virtues of the Chinese nation and its rulers, to the introduction of Mandarin instead of Cantonese in Chinese language classes. From the mysterious disappearance of 5 booksellers for publishing books critical of Chinese leaders, to the decision to rule out universal suffrage in the selection of the city's chief executive. And now, the extradition bill. These are among a litany of issues which have led to the perception of increasing interference of China in the affairs of Hong Kong. It has also laid bare the reality of a deeply fractured Hong Kong. Former Legislative Council President Jasper Tsang is one of Beijing's most prominent supporters in Hong Kong. He agreed that the trust between the people in Hong Kong and Beijing has diminished over the years, and that has made it harder for the principle of one country, two systems to flourish.
The central government stressed their willingness not to interfere into Hong Kong affairs. Then gradually, with the objection to national education, and then the rejection of the method for electing the chief executive in 2017 proposed by the central government, the central government saw things in Hong Kong going out of hand. And their reaction has been to sort of try to, bring things back into order. And that would be seen by Hong Kong people as, what you would say, tightening up the control, taking away some of their freedom and so on. If both sides, feel threatened by the other side, if both sides are doing what they can, sort of to, defend, protect what they believe is being taken away from them, then we are left with very little ground for one country, two systems to work on.
To the protesters, the bill has touched on the very raw nerve of Hong Kong, its independent judicial system and liberal way of life. Many fear that the bill will be used to send dissidents to face trial in mainland China and subjected to the Chinese judicial system.
The broader concern really relies around China's legal system and the lack of trust for that within Hong Kong. And there is a feeling that this bill really opens a way for Hong Kong people to be extradited to China to face justice under that legal system. And there is very little trust in the government to implement that safely. I think there are some very valid concerns. We do know that, for example, business people who have disputes within China are frequently embroiled in legal cases. There's many, certainly in the foreign business community, who complain about that.
The extradition bill really hit at the cornerstone of what the Basic Law had promised, because the Basic Law, most important to Hong Kong people, is about the one country, two systems. And with this extradition bill, if it passed, it means that one country, two system would totally be destroyed, because anyone in Hong Kong, including human rights activists, of course, and even a lot of businessmen, which may be in the kind of legal loopholes, without their knowing, could be in danger to be extradited to China.
So what's next for your... Meeting and speaking to Bonnie Leong for the first time, it would be difficult to guess this is the same lady who's behind the biggest protest that Hong Kong has ever witnessed. The mild-mannered and soft-spoken 30-year-old is the convener of the political party Civil Human Rights Front, which organized the 1 million and 2 million protests on June 9th and June 16th, respectively. I asked Bonnie what motivated her to rally the people to oppose the bill.
This is very personal, and also Hong Kong is my home. I do not want to see Hong Kong would become a place without rule of law, without freedom, without human rights. If that is so, Hong Kong will no longer be a home that I would want to keep living in. We really need to protect our home and make our home a better place, make our home as it should be.
Bernard Chan, who's the convener of the Executive Council, or EXCO, however, argued that's not even the real intention of the bill. The original idea, he said, was to allow the city to handle case-by-case extradition requests from jurisdictions with no prior agreement, and not to harm the freedom that the people of Hong Kong currently enjoy.
Essentially, it comes down to the sort of mistrust and the fear that this will open a floodgate between the two legal systems, Hong Kong and the mainland. But that was never the original intention of the bill. When the bill was first originally announced, even the reaction from the business sector has been somewhat neutral at the time. But then again, you know, after a month or two, things are start to gone very wrong. I mean, so there are a lot of concern from the business sector, especially, you know, a lot of Hong Kong manufacturers have their factories in China, so they were concerned about whether some of their past practices could be even like, you know, what if it's like a tax this bill? Would this issue also be exposed themselves to this extradition, which is completely actually unrelated?
But that's precisely the concern of 60-year-old Simon Shi. The businessman, who has business interests in China, for one, doesn't have a strong faith or trust in the Chinese legal system. He's concerned that once the legislation becomes law, it would be very difficult for him to operate his business in China.
其實我哋入邊咧都有千幾個會員，咁咧就大家都有傾偈呢個條例，咁咧大家都有擔心咧，就話喺香港而家好容易咧，就我哋做大陸嘅生意咧，來來往往咧就好容易踩到呢個陷阱呢個地雷，就擔心我哋會有機會可能犯咗呢個逃犯條例嘅法例，而影響咗個生意。咁保持原有嘅法律制度咧，呢樣嘢咧，而家呢條逃犯條例一出嚟嘅時間咧，保持原有個法律制度咧就會變咗啦。咁喺大陸犯法咧，嗰個檢控咧就嗰個程序比較簡單嘅，佢個法律基礎同香港係唔同。香港就要搜集證據去告個被告，咁咧揾唔到證據告個被告咧，個利益就歸被告嘅。喺但係內地就唔係嘅。
That perception has contributed to the growing opposition among segments of the Hong Kong population to the bill. The protesters are demanding that the bill be withdrawn completely. But will the government cave in to their demands? Here's the government headquarters, the seat of power in Hong Kong. Under Mrs. Carrie Lam's watch, Hong Kong has seen the largest demonstration since the handover, and her approval ratings has plummeted the lowest amongst Hong Kong's 4 chief executives. How can the broken trust between the government and the people of Hong Kong be repaired? What's next for Carrie Lam and her leadership? "22 years have passed since Hong Kong's sovereignty was transferred from Britain to China in July 1997. But instead of embracing the new reality of a new ruler at the helm, an even angrier and more politicized wave of younger generation of Hong Kongers has emerged. There have been at least 5 major anti-government demonstrations since the city's return to China. All of them united by a common goal: resisting what they perceive as an increasing Chinese influence and interference into Hong Kong's affairs. Since the territory's handover, they've been fighting to preserve their freedom and personal liberties, as spelt out in the Basic Law. And any attempt by the government to alter their way of life will be viewed with suspicion.
I think the commonality is really a mistrust of the local government to represent the people of Hong Kong and their interests when they're in a discussion with China, and also a mistrust about the relationship with China itself. There is this feeling that mainland China is forcing change on Hong Kong that the territory doesn't want. So I think that's been a common theme running through, and the idea that the political system in Hong Kong, particularly the legislature, doesn't really represent the interests of the public on the ground. So people rely on the street to impose pressure on the local leadership.
In 2003, the city's first chief executive, Tung Chee-hwa, tried to pass Article 23, a national security law that criminalizes treason and sedition against the Chinese Communist Party. After a peaceful march of 500,000 people, the proposal was shelved indefinitely. In 2012, tens of thousands of Hong Kongers took to the streets to protest against a proposed bill to include a national education in the school curriculum. The people saw it as an attempt to brainwash Hong Kongers. The government under Chief Executive C.Y. Leung later backed down and gave the discretion to all schools on whether to implement the curriculum. The umbrella movement, or Occupy Central, in 2014 almost brought the city to a standstill. The 79-day peaceful sit-in demanded universal suffrage, the right to choose their own leader, instead of limiting it to a list of candidates pre-approved by Beijing. Protests ended without any concessions from the central government. In 2019, history has been written yet again, not once, but twice, within just 2 weeks, as anger mounted over the proposed introduction of the extradition bill.
We have 1 million people going to the street and then 2 million people going to the street. And so in June 4th of 1988, the scale is only about 1 million people.
I think this is the biggest political crisis since the handover.
In spite of all the opposition to the bill, the reality is Hong Kong has traditionally served as a sanctuary for political dissidents. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the father of the 1911 Chinese Revolution, fled to Hong Kong to avoid arrest by the Qing dynasty government. In 1949, Hong Kong became the refuge for mainland Chinese who escaped from the new Communist Party of China. Hong Kong has also for years gained the reputation as a safe haven for dissidents and corrupt officials fleeing the mainland. This extradition bill is intended to plug the loophole. But the deep mistrust that has developed between the protesters and China over the years has made it harder for the legislation to see the light of day.
Obviously, the Hong Kong society doesn't trust the central government anymore. I think the level of trust was much higher 20 years ago at the time of the handover. I think the level of trust has clearly deteriorated over the years. Chief executives like C.Y. Leung and Carrie Lam have contributed to that. But I think the main driver of that degradation of the level of trust has been Beijing. Has been the fact that Beijing wants to really take control of Hong Kong, doesn't want to leave Hong Kong so much autonomy, and doesn't want to democratize the political system as it had promised when it signed the joint declaration with the British in 1984, and that's why people are disappointed.
But some, like Mr. Tam Yu Chong, disagrees. He feels that as a new political master, Beijing has every right to intervene in the affairs of the territory, should it find the need to do so.
中央同埋特區嘅居民，大家都好支持呢個一國兩制，咁大家就一定要按照呢個方向嚟做。咁當然喺個過程裏邊呢，你話會唔會有啲矛盾啊？可能中央方面好關注一國呢個落實嘅問題啊，因為呢個前提，亦都有啲香港嘅部分人。喺度強調係兩制，佢希望中央乜都唔好管啊，除咗國防外交之外，但係呢個又咁唔實際嘅，因為按照基本法規定咧，好多嘢中央仲保留個權力喺度嘅啊，所以中央係有個叫做全面管治權，而下放一部分嘅權力俾特區咁解嘅啫。咁呢個咧要大家清楚理解明白啊，咁而呢個信唔信任嘅問題咧係互相嘅嚇，即係如果有時喺香港有啲人做出一啲行為出嚟，令到中央有擔心嘅，譬如有小撮人喺度搞咩港獨嚇，咁呢啲會令到中央係會有所擔心啦。
The pro-Beijing parties will blindly follow and support the government, and in particular take instructions from the liaison office, which to many people is very contrary to one country, two systems. Because if you look at our basic law, it's written in black and white. Any central government organ stationed in Hong Kong cannot interfere in the internal administration of Hong Kong, which is the responsibility of the chief executive and his or her team.
As the debate rages on, some observers feel that the problem involving the people of Hong Kong goes far deeper than just a disagreement over the interpretations of the city's basic law. The growing anger can be attributed to the harsh economic realities faced by the people in the city. Skyrocketing property prices, the widening income gap between the haves and the have-nots, and the growing uncertainty over Hong Kong's political future have all contributed to a sense of hopelessness and disillusionment, especially among the young.
I think it has evolved over time. I think part of it is the ongoing economic challenges, especially facing the younger population. You know, many of them, a few years into the job market, they don't really see how they can afford housing. And meanwhile, you know, income growth is relatively slow. And this is a phenomenon that we've seen across many more developed Asian economies in this part of the world as well. I think secondly, I think you've also seen you know, various legislations or legal challenges that came through. I think people again feel that the potential for universal suffrage is still a long way away. And many of the legislators may not be able to fully represent what they believe in or their value. So I think, again, these issues are embedded in a society right now, and that's creating more tension within Hong Kong.
If anything, the extradition bill has been used as a cannon fodder to attack the government and vent their anger at Beijing's tightening grip on the city.
Only one single piece of legislation could not have provoked such an immense degree of anger among the people, especially among the young people. So I think many things happening in the last few years, or perhaps even in a longer period in the past have sort of contributed to this building up of dissatisfaction, suspicion, anger, mistrust among some people in Hong Kong, especially the younger generation.
Bridging the gulf of distrust between the people and the government lies squarely in the hands of the Chief Executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam. But there's an old adage that says one man or woman cannot serve two masters. Balancing this dual role of fulfilling the duties to the people of Hong Kong and being answerable to the central government is a constant challenge facing Mrs. Lam. Will her attempt to introduce the extradition bill prove to be her own undoing? Can she afford to claim the moral high ground and pull the deeply fractured society together? Or will it set the stage for her imminent departure from politics?
I have heard you loud and clear and have reflected deeply on all that has transpired. I personally have to shoulder much of the responsibility. This has led to controversies, disputes and anxieties in society. For this, I offer my most sincere apology to all people of Hong Kong.
A heartfelt apology from an embattled leader, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam, in the wake of mass protests which plunged the city into chaos. Yet, in spite of two televised apologies, coupled with a declaration that the controversial extradition bill is effectively dead, it has failed to placate the protesters. To date, they're still demanding that she officially withdraws the bill and step down. But these are demands which she's not prepared to consider at this point in time.
Effectively, the bill is dead, right? So it's no different from being retracted. The one reason why we're not calling it a retraction is that I suppose the bill itself has some merit. The bill itself was not a bad intent. So there are supporters of this bill as well. So I suppose by retracting it, it's almost maybe give the impression that something has gone wrong with the bill, right? So I think maybe perhaps that's the reason why we're not calling it a complete retraction, but it's a suspension.
Others, like Legislative Council member Dennis Kwok, however, has a different view. He feels that Carrie Lam is not willing to withdraw the bill so as not to lose face.
I think it's to do with face. She doesn't want to appear to cave into the demands of the Hong Kong people. But I think after 2 million people taking to the streets, I think she has dealt a terrible blow to her credibility, to her ability to govern. And this is purely her own misreading and complete, I think, a misjudgment of the Hong Kong people. And she has to pay the price.
62-year-old career civil servant Carrie Lam came to power in March 2017, following the departure of her predecessor Leong Chun-ying. She was voted into office by a 1,200-strong committee dominated by pro-Beijing loyalists, securing 777 votes. That's the first time that a woman was elevated to the city's top job. Upon assuming office, she vowed to heal divisions in the society. As a top civil servant, she's seen as a no-nonsense bureaucrat who could get things done. But 2 years on, Hong Kong has again been shaken by a wave of record-breaking protests and has put her leadership to the test.
Carrie Lam has achieved something that no one has been able to do, which is to unite the Hong Kong people, unfortunately, against her and her government.
And for the first time in history, violence in the city has soared to new heights. The protesters not only clashed with the police, they also broke into, vandalized and ransacked the city's Legislative Council building.
I played a part in the planning and design of the Legislative Council complex, including the interior of the chamber. And I saw everything torn to pieces. I saw the anger of the young people. And this is absolutely unprecedented. So no one can say it is just another protest. We have protests almost every other day, but these things simply unknown to Hong Kong before.
Some observers, however, believe that the strong reaction against the bill is the clearest indication that it's time for Carrie Lam to go.
Her administration is effectively dead. I think she has dealt a terrible blow to her credibility, to her ability to govern, and this is purely her own misreading and complete, I think, a misjudgment of the Hong Kong people, and she has to pay the price.
I don't think nowadays in Hong Kong really a lot of people can trust Carrie Lam. It's not on the so-called ability. She has been a civil servant for nearly 40 years. I think he's a very competent civil servant. But her judgment and her decision making is terrible. It's terrible. The way she responds to the parade, on the way she responds, we have 3 young people dying. They committed suicide because they are so frustrated and disappointed to what happened in Hong Kong. And she didn't say a word.
While there are those who are calling for her immediate removal over the handling of the bill, others insist that she should fight on and stay the course.
The pro-establishment has its supporters. Public anger has been rising over alleged police brutality over its recent handling of the protests. These people here are supporting police action and by proxy supporting the government.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam have openly admitted that the whole arrangement was done properly, and he apologized for that. And I certainly hope that the Hong Kong people can give her a chance again, because up until most recently she had done quite a lot for 2 years, and she still have a lot of plans in mind, especially many of those are dealing with the daily lives of Hong Kong people. It would take time for her and her administration to prove to the people that she has the ability to do so, and we need it. But it's painful, it would take time, but I have confidence that she can do it.
For a couple of years, her administration had been doing very well. She obviously concentrated her efforts and the efforts of the government on tackling economic livelihood problems, and the government did sort of achieve a number of goals, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Let me put it this way, I cannot see anyone else who can do the job better than Carrie.
But what about Beijing's reaction to the entire episode? It has voiced support for the Hong Kong government and called on all foreign governments not to interfere into its internal affairs. It has, however, decided against taking any firm action to intervene and put an end to what it described as a direct challenge to its authority.
We know that at this moment the international environment is quite hostile to China, and so Xi Jinping has to face the Sino-American trade war, and he also had to attend the G20 summit. Of course, he has to get the international sympathy in the process in order to gain, in order not to lose the moral high ground. And so, if there is a serious confrontation in Hong Kong, and even bringing political violence in some form, it would make him more difficult in such an international environment. And so eventually, out of the expectation of many people, the Hong Kong government eventually compromised in this process. I think it comes as a surprise to many people.
I think Beijing is adamant in its discourse, in its propaganda. On the ground, it is much more cautious because it knows that the stakes are pretty high as far as Hong Kong is concerned. Again, Beijing can put an end to Hong Kong overnight, but the cost would be unbearable or at least too high, and not worth. And the risks are not worth taking because actually China and the central government have demonstrated they have other means to keep control over Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, the protesters have promised more rallies and demonstrations against the proposed extradition bill until their demands are met. But the option of whether the chief executive stays or goes is not in the leader's hands. Political observers agree the ball is entirely in Beijing's court.
We always say that everything depends on the final decision of Beijing. Kerry herself cannot make any decision. It depends on Beijing. I think this is not possible in this moment.
It is only a theoretical viewpoint that if Carrie Lam steps down, it can help to improve the existing situation and also, of the Hong Kong government. But if we look back to the reality, it never happened in the past. So, for example, C.Y. Leung, he was also very unpopular, but the central government let him to finish his first term of office. And for Tung Chee-hwa, he had provoked 500,000 people going to the street. But the central government also allowed him to stay in his office for 2 more years, and then replaced by Donald Trump. I think the most important point here is that Beijing would only allow you to resign by when Beijing authorities have found another suitable guy to replace your positions.
It may be just a matter of time before she finally steps down. She has already lost the trust of the people, making the prospect of staying in office a far more difficult option. Carrie Lam is now seen as a lame duck who may not serve a full term as Hong Kong's chief executive. Even if she leaves, will her eventual political departure resolve Hong Kong's deep-seated and seemingly insurmountable problems? The return of Hong Kong to China on July 1st, 1997 was an immensely proud moment for China. With its image of a progressive, modern and prosperous city, Hong Kong was seen as a vibrant crossroad of East and West, one that could offer the way forward for China, or how it might become one day. But 22 years on, that perception appears to be fading fast. Today, Beijing does not rely on the special administrative region as much as it did. Chinese cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen have all surpassed Hong Kong in terms of its economic importance. Last year, Shenzhen's GDP alone surpassed that of Hong Kong. In other words, Hong Kong today faces a much stiffer competition from other cities in China that boast greater resources, a wealth of talent and powerful ambitions.
I think within the sort of Chinese context, the fact that Hong Kong is now a lot less important in terms of its economic size relative to the rest of China is much smaller than it was at the handover. The importance that the Chinese government places on foreign international opinion has also diminished. So prior to, for example, the Olympics, I think China was a lot more careful about doing things that might sully its international reputation. So in more recent years, China's been willing to kind of take the pushback from countries like the US and the UK on Hong Kong because it feels stronger and more powerful in its own right.
You can look in Shenzhen. You know, me growing up, Shenzhen is only a fishing village. Today, they are the Silicon Valley of China. You know, so I have to admit that even I didn't pay much attention to Shenzhen for all these years until almost just 10 years ago. You know, and it came from nowhere. And then also now I realize Shenzhen have a GDP just as big as Hong Kong, if not bigger. You know, it caught me by surprise. You know, I never even paid attention to Shenzhen, and all of a sudden they're right here next to me. You know, so if we don't start to pay attention and care about what's happening in China, then we will easily be made irrelevant.
While other Chinese cities are growing at breakneck speed, Hong Kong has been mired by never-ending disputes between Beijing-backed government and the pro-democracy activists. They see any attempt at speeding up Hong Kong's integration with China as an interference into their internal affairs. It's fueled by their growing fears about the erosion of civil liberties and freedom that sets this former British colony apart from the rest of China. And this yawning gap between Beijing and Hong Kong looks to widen in the years to come, despite the influx of Chinese from the mainland into the tiny city.
Beijing's expectation was that, you know, after 20 years, 30 years, maybe because of the sheer number of mainland Chinese settling down here, the mindset is going to change. Well, the result has been, in Beijing's point of view, pretty disappointing, because what has happened actually is that most mainland Chinese people moving to Hong Kong have become Hong Kongese in a way. They've started to also identify with Hong Kong values. So to not only pick up Cantonese because they want to be part of the community here, but also adopt many of the political values which most Hong Kong people cherish.
We have almost gone to the middle of the 50 years promise. And in the eyes of Beijing authorities, after more than 20 years, the mentality of the Hong Kong people are still almost the same compared with the 1997. And how can you guarantee that in the remaining 20 more years we can change? And so they need to do something. Of course, you can also say that it is part of the governing style of Xi Jinping. He's a strong man. He cannot be patient with all those things anymore. And as I mentioned, it is almost half of the cost, and so they should begin to do something.
The reality is, residents of the city love their home, their freedom and civil liberties. Hong Kong to them is still a gem, being one of Asia's top financial centers. Among them is 32-year-old Bonnie Leong from the Civil Human Rights Front. She feels that Hong Kong's freedom, rule of law and one country, two systems are core values which must be preserved at all times.
We really want to keep this, and as we've shown to the world that we are prepared to sacrifice a lot to fight to protect all these values. If we can have true democracy, we can have one man, one vote for chief executive and for all of the legislative council members. If we can establish the system before 2047, as soon as possible, of course, the sooner the better. And if we can build up this system, we can be a showcase for China, and we can be an influence to China to modernize their political system. That is a lot of Hong Kong people would hope to achieve.
I think Hong Kong, what has happened in the last 20 years, it's clearly a consolidation of Hong Kong cultural and to some degree political identity, you know, with the liberal values in which they believe, the use of Cantonese as opposed to Mandarin, and also the localist movement, which has sort of been the manifestation of that fear to become just another Chinese city. So a lot of people want to protect Hong Kong the way it is. So some people are going to leave, but most young people, I think, are going to stay and try to fight for Hong Kong. That's my prediction for the future.
But in spite of idealism and courage, it's too early to tell if Beijing will simply buckle under pressure and cave in to their demands. If anything, the fate of Hong Kong may have already been decided. And come 2047, one country, two systems, formulated by China's former leader Deng Xiaoping, will come to an end. So is this act of defiance nothing more than a futile effort?
There's no question that Hong Kong is part of China. And there is no expiry date on our mini-constitution, the basic law. It doesn't say that by 2047 it would expire. So what will happen post-2047 is obviously a question that we need to address. But I think it is too early to say that, everything will be gone by 2047. No one can predict that far out, especially given the current geopolitical situation. No one can predict things 5 years down the line. So I think let's not jump ahead of ourselves and predict what will happen in 2047 and consider everything will be futile. Meanwhile, we need to do everything we can to protect the freedoms and rights of the Hong Kong people as enshrined under the basic law, and to ensure they will not continue to erode.
If you look at the so-called the 2047 date, I may not be around, but my two sons will definitely be around to see that. So I will certainly hope whatever I'm doing today is for their best interest. Now, of course, and that sometimes is where we differ. It's like, well, what is best interest for Hong Kong? Especially what's best interest for the young people for the future, right? So I think some people might feel that the better future for Hong Kong is to be further insulated from the mainland. Whereas I would disagree. I would agree that Hong Kong's future is very much China's future. So we should definitely try to be more understanding to what's happening to China. But I certainly understand there are groups out there who say, well, we prefer not.
For now, hope appears to be slipping away from Hong Kongers as they march and rally week after week. And yet, hope is the very thing that keeps them going.
I've spoken to pro-establishment voices, I've spoken to pan-democrat protesters. One thing's clear to me, both sides love Hong Kong. Both sides want the best for their city. But the vision of what is best is strikingly different. One side says more integration with the mainland. The other side says Hong Kong's success formula should be kept the way it's always been. And it's the polarization of these two views that's causing the social rifts. The anger that erupts time and time again, just like recent massive protests, even after more than 20 years since the handover. What happens next depends on how both sides can meet in the middle, and by focusing on common ground. That is, what both sides want is the same thing, the best for Hong Kong's future.
The government has decided to suspend the legislative
The democratic activists may have scored a moral victory by getting the extradition bill shelved indefinitely. But is it an admission of defeat on the part of Beijing? Or is it more of a tactical retreat? No matter what the position is, it's clear that Beijing still holds the trump card. Love it or hate it, China remains instrumental to Hong Kong's future.
Xi Jinping is not the type of guy to make compromises. Well, he has demonstrated that he can make compromises because he has sort of given in on that extradition bill. But my worry, and that the worry quite a number of observers here, is that they will take their revenge sooner or later.
It's going to be very challenging to explain for the rest of the country why Hong Kong can continue to retain their special privileges after 2047, right? So today, of course, they will continue to honor, right, the 50 years unchanged. But by 2047, why would the rest of China will continue to give Hong Kong their special privileges if we don't offer them anything new, right? But we do.